Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Coping with Crisis series. We are now looking at dealing with pain or dealing with hurt in our lives. This is going to be part 2. And so make sure you catch part 1 in this so you can catch up to where we're at. And so we're going to be looking at how to process pain. We're going to be looking at how to deal with it, how to understand it, and get it out of our lives. If we have pain left over from the past that's been haunting us and we're still dealing with it, we're going to learn how to get that out of us. So, as we talk about these things, understand that we all go through pain, we all go through hurt, we all go through loss, we all have disappointment in our lives. And what that does to us, if we don't process it correctly biblically, it will eventually depress us. It brings us down. It causes us to get very bitter, resentful. It messes with our emotions. We start getting hopeless. Again, obviously, depression can pop up. But basically, physically, our system starts shutting down. It can get so bad. And we get disheartened and just very discouraged. And then basically, your heart loses hope. And when we are at that stage, we don't think straight, we don't think clear anymore. We're going to make unwise decisions, bad decisions based on emotion. We'll start losing structure of our lives. We just, tasks undone. We can't get things started. We can't clean up after ourselves. We can't get projects going. And so we start losing structure to our lives. So pain does a lot to us. And so we gotta figure this out. We gotta come up with the biblical solution that the Bible offers to tell us how to deal with this. Understand this about pain and hurt that comes into our lives. It's associated to two things. Basically, and like I think I mentioned this before, something was taken from us which caused us pain, or something was given to us that we didn't want. So maybe you had your childhood taken from you. Maybe you had something stolen from you. Your family is stolen from you. Your health was stolen from you. And so you lost something, right? So the pain is associated to that. Or maybe that you were given something you didn't want. Maybe your parents divorced, and then all of a sudden your parents remarried, and all of a sudden you're given new siblings that don't even belong to your family, but come from another family. And you're given something that you don't want because they've become a thorn in your side and they're problematic. And all of a sudden you have to deal with something that was brought to you that you didn't want. That happens so many times. I feel sorry. Some of these kids in the schools, I hear the stories from teachers that tell about these kids' personal lives. And some of these kids' personal lives, their parents have been married 4 different times to different people, and they bring in all these other stepkids in. They're dealing with almost a dozen different stepkids from 4 different people. It's a disaster. Those kids didn't ask for that, but they were given something that they didn't want. And that's where pain is associated. You lose something that you didn't want taken away, and you get something that you didn't want. And so this happens to all of us. And it could be an event that happened that triggered all of this, or a process of things that happened. It doesn't matter. It's going to give us pain. And basically, the way we wanted our lives to go didn't happen. It didn't occur. And we hoped it would have went this way, but it didn't because of this pain and this hurt that was caused to us. And so basically, we start out with life, and it turns out radically different than when we expected it. And it really can bring us down, cause more pain because of that. And then when that pain happened to us, like we talked about before, we didn't have the skills, basically, to manage that pain, to deal with our feelings and confront that reality. We just didn't have the ability to do it. It typically happened at a younger age. And of course, none of us had that ability. So now what we're dealing with, and now that we're older, is to be able to go back and reprocess that pain in a biblical way so it finally can get out of us. So before we go any further, let's just review what I talked about last time. And what we talked about is we can't deny the pain or hurt in our lives. It's there, it's real. But if you go into denial or rationalize it or minimize it or whatever you deal with, or however you deal with it, denying the pain actually causes you more pain later on. It's like planting a seed, and then that takes root and grows and develops, and then eventually the fruit from that tree comes out in your life, and that fruit causes pain. So when we bury that pain and act like it didn't happen, or hey, we're good, it wasn't that bad, that actually hurts us later on. So we don't want to deny it, but we also, like we talked about, we want to identify the emotions that we felt with it, and then start naming that emotion. Where like you say something like, I felt abandoned, I felt betrayed, I felt threatened, I was hurt, whatever, those kinds of things. I was lied to. And so you have to identify the emotion, and we talked about that. The third thing we talked about is we have to discover whether it's an old pain or a new pain. So we have to look at the new pain that we're having and experiencing. And if we're going to the nth degree with it and our reaction to it, it probably means that it's attached to an old pain that we haven't dealt with. And so we have to figure this out. Is this brand new, or is this pain that's happening to me linked to the past? And so the way to know that is if you're overreacting to things that you shouldn't be overreacting to. You go to the nth degree. You go to DEFCON 6 when you only should be at DEFCON 1. And when you see that signals to us that it's related to an old pain. So we have to do what? Reprocess that hurt with the truth, and then using God's giving process of grieving it. That's how you deal with it. So we're going to go through that a little bit. We're going to talk about how to process every facet with the truth and go through the stage of grieving, okay? So let me make this statement. We all know how difficult it is to release the pain or the hurt from people that have been mean to us, that have been cruel to us, that have been unfair to us. It is very difficult to let that go. I get it, you get it. And that's what causes us a lot of pain. It happens. And so what happens with all of this, we have to then realize that we, because of that, have created a grievance. It's like being at work and you have a grievance against an employee or whatever, or a supervisor, and you file a grievance with HR, and you stick it in the HR box and for them to deal with it, and hopefully within a day or two, they address the situation and address the grievance. But when this happens with us, we file a grievance, and we put it in the HR box, but there's nothing there to pick up the grievance and deal with it. Because no one's going to deal with it. Because it's on us. We have to deal with it. So there's no HR department in our lives. So if you file a grievance, that grievance will just sit there and not be dealt with. Now you'll have that grievance, but it will not be resolved. And this is what happens in people's lives when they start creating grievances. And grievances basically is stopping the person from allowing the process of grief to have its effect. Because they're going to sit there and wait until the issue is dealt with. Well, the issue may never ever be dealt with. And so you're just going to have that grievance, your claim, sit there your whole life. And we file a grievance, the main reason why is because we don't possess the ability to biblically process pain correctly and handle the situation from a biblical perspective. We just simply don't know what to do, so we file a grievance. And I get it, we all do that, but that's not what the Bible wants us to do. And so then what happens is when you file this grievance and you want it resolved and no one's going to resolve it for you, you start making space in your head, in your emotions, in your thoughts, and you make this room in your heart and your head for this grievance of injustice. And it becomes all consuming. It becomes what you think about. You almost can become obsessive about it. And you can tell that people are obsessive about their grievances when you talk to them. They will always bring up the same issue over and over and over again. So when you hear them do that, you know that they have rented a lot of space to this individual and this grievance, and they simply can't get over it. And when you hear them tell this story, it'll seem like it just happened yesterday, but it might be a story that's from 20 to 30 years ago. Because they're dwelling on it constantly, it will seem to them that it just happened. That's how messed up a person can get about it. So let's take a test right now to see if you and I have a grievance or a pain or a hurt that has been filed in the HR department, and we have a grievance, and we haven't processed this biblically. So let's take a test and do a diagnostic. Number one, do we think about a particular painful or hurtful event more than we think about all the blessings in our lives? You have to answer that honestly. We typically side with the bad things that happen to us in our thinking. We typically don't look at the blessings in our lives. But if you've been hurt very bad, then that will be what you think about. That's the evidence that you have a grievance, that you're all constantly thinking about it. Okay, second, when you and I think about how someone hurt us, do you and I physically get affected? Now, what I mean by that is it turns your stomach. You become visibly angry. You get a headache thinking about it. You become very uncomfortable talking about it. You get very upset. There's physical things that go on with you. Your body starts reacting in a certain way, and the body will react typically in a flight or fight response. The adrenaline glands release, and you'll either withdraw or you'll go on the attack. And so when you have this adrenaline rush of fight or flight, at that time you can't even think straight. Your body will go into survival mode. Now, this can happen to you just simply thinking about when that person hurts you. You may have thoughts of revenge. You may have thoughts of running away physically. And all that's because you have a grievance. And the idea is you'll see this in a long-term anger. It's not just an anger for someone cutting you off the road. You will sense a long-term anger inside of you. And that long-term anger is not helping you, but hurting you. When you think about anger, and we did a whole series on anger. Anger is meant to be used for constructive actions towards things that are not right. Okay? And it's a good thing. But destructive anger that goes long-term makes us bitter and resentful and causes these physical reactions in us, causes anxiety and stress, and actually starts affecting us physically. It hurts us physically, spiritually, and mentally, and emotionally. So that's bad anger. But anyway, a third diagnostic question. When you and I think about how someone hurt us, do we have the same old habitual and repetitive thoughts about it? Okay? And what I mean by that is, if you are actually processing things correctly from a biblical way, you'll start seeing things more from the biblical standard and principle. But if you keep thinking in the same old terms that's habitual and repetitive that you've always thought about, then that's a sign that you have a grievance. Because the biblical way of thinking about it would actually allow you to process this, would allow you to go through the grieving process and let it go. But again, habitual and repetitive thoughts about it. Like for instance, the person who did this to you. How do you see them right now? Do you still see them in the same light? Well, what do you mean? Well, let's say you've monsterized somebody that hurt you, and I get it. We tend to do that. You monsterize them. Like, this person's on the level of Hitler or something like that, right? Do you still think they're Hitler today? Do you still think that they're Genghis Khan? Do you still think that? Or do you think from a biblical standpoint, they're a sinner? We all have sinned. We all make mistakes. We all do stupid things. They have dysfunctional patterns in their life. They have character flaws. They have spiritual problems. They're spiritually blind. And do you see them in that light? Versus they're just a monster and they should know better. Versus, no, they're pretty messed up. And the reason they did this to you and I is because that's how messed up they are. They actually would have done this to anybody, but that's how messed up they are. They can't hold back them acting bad. They just don't have the character. They don't have the spiritual walk with the Lord. They don't have the maturity. And it could be that they have mental problems. They have demonic problems. They have emotional problems. Whatever that might be. Do you see them in that light? Versus they're a monster and the monster needs to be taken down. So get out the pitchforks and get out the torches and we'll go after and storm the Frankenstein that's in my life. See, that tells you where you're at. That tells you if you have a grievance. How do you see them? Okay. Fourth, do you find that you or I keep rehearsing the event over and over in our minds, and then we keep rehearsing this event to others? That's a pattern that we just keep going over it and over and over it again? Well, if you're doing that, you have a grievance. Now, if you answered yes to any of those 4 questions, you have a grievance and that needs to be dealt with. And no one's from the HR department is going to pick up that grievance and solve your problem. You have to deal with it now. You have to deal with it in the biblical way of handling the issue. Okay, so let's start down the process of understanding things from a biblical way, understanding the grief process. Okay, the first thing you have to do, obviously, is bring the truth to the situation instead of our perceptions of that reality. Our perceptions are notoriously wrong, and we have to come to grips with that. Now, I'm not saying that what happened to you or happened to me didn't happen. I'm just saying how you framed it and how you interpreted that could be wrong. Okay? So we have to bring truth to the situation, and we have to bring truth to how we perceived it, but also what the truth is about that person. Because look, folks, if we cling to our initial reactions to the grievance, then that hides the truth from you, and that hides the specifics of what happened. So, say that your spouse left you and rejected you, and you're sitting there saying, my spouse, they did this to get back at me. They're mean. They're a monster. That I can't believe they did this to me. They betrayed me. I get it. They did it to you. But if you're still looking at it through your initial reactions, that's a problem. Because your initial reaction was survival mode. Yours and my reaction was to do anything we can to survive, which is either fight or flight, and how to deal with the perception of attack, basically, okay? If you're still there, you're not understanding the situation correctly. And so you don't understand the truth, and you don't understand the specifics behind all that happened. Okay, we'll talk more about that. But that's the first thing, is we got to bring the truth to the situation. And this typically needs a navigator to do this, because we typically are too emotional about the person who did this to us. So that being the case, a good counselor or a pastor would be in order to help you with this, to understand what they did to you, okay? Now, the first thing we want to understand in bringing the truth to the situation is this. You have to stop blaming the person for how you feel, okay? I'm not saying, and please understand me, that the person who hurt you is not blameworthy. They are blameworthy. They did something to you. They're responsible for doing that, and they are responsible for that hurt. But what I am saying is this. You can't blame them for how you feel today. Okay? We typically feel pain, and we look for someone to blame. We go into the blame game, right? The hurt we currently feel, we believe, is someone else's responsibility, not ours. So we feel bad right now, currently, for what someone did to us 20 years ago. Okay? I'm not saying they didn't do it. They did do it, and they're responsible for hurting you. But are they responsible for how you feel today? No, they are not. You're responsible. But what typically people do is they want to cast the blame for how they feel today on what happened 20 years ago or what happened 30 years ago and blame the person for what they feel today. You cannot do that. That is wrong. That is unbiblical. We can blame a person for doing wrong, no doubt about it, and they're accountable for that. But you're responsible for your emotions. You and I are responsible for our reactions to what people do to us. No one has that kind of power to tell you how to feel. No one. Now, if you give that person that power, then yes, you can give away your power, but you've given it away. But you're responsible, and I'm responsible for how we feel. And when we do this, please understand, it creates in us a pause in the grieving process, and we remain stuck. And we remain stuck in the past, and it continues to cause us pain in the present. But we can't go into the future because we're stuck in the past, what someone did to us. And so, your life's a mess right now, the way you feel, because of what someone did to you in the past. And so you feel that present pain right now. So again, let me reiterate this. Holding people accountable for their actions is not the same as blaming them for how you feel. The two are separate. There's two different categories. Blaming people for how you feel keeps you tied to someone who hurt you. It actually keeps you in relationship with that person who hurt you. Now you say, well, I don't want a relationship with that person. Yeah, but because you're blaming them, it keeps pulling you back to them. It also will create this helpless feeling that you're stuck in this pain and nothing can make it any better. And then you take on what we call a victim mentality. And in that victim mentality, you're going to feel feelings of being vulnerable. You're going to feel, I feel unprotected. I feel powerless. I can't do anything because of what this person did to me 20 years ago. I'm just powerless. I can't do anything. Poor me, poor me, poor me. I'm a victim. That is unbiblical. And what that does is it keeps the perpetrator, the one who hurt you, in power over you. So not only did they hurt you in the past, they're able to hurt you now in your emotions and keep you down in your present situation. Why would anyone want to do that? It's because they don't know how to process things biblically. So, if we get into the idea of blaming people for how we feel, not what they did, but how we feel currently in the present, it will cause you and I to want something from them. Okay? So when you're tied to that person, they're making you feel bad right now, You will want something from them. And you never will give up on this. You will keep going with it. So what we want from them that we'll never get from them is we want them to admit the wrong they did to us. We want them to apologize. We want them to see the light. We want them to admit the truth. We want them to come clean. We want them to say we were right and they were wrong. To give us something back that they took away. To take something from us that they gave us. To apologize to everyone they lied to about us. To beg on their knees for forgiveness. Or to watch them get penalized by God and let Him do His work of judgment on them, like a lightning bolt from the sky or something like that would do just fine. But those things that you're waiting for will never come. Again, you've put your grievance in the HR box and there's no one sitting at the HR table. And so you're wanting something from somebody because you believe that they're making you feel bad today. And the only way to get rid of this feeling that you have, this pain that you have, is for them to come begging and crawling and say they did it and they're so sorry. They beg for your forgiveness and they're going to go all through town and tell everybody how they were wrong and you were right. Now, if you're waiting for that one, keep holding your breath because you're going to be holding your breath for a long time. But that's what starts happening. They hold the grievance until they get from that person what they want. So what happens? People die, and they never get that grievance settled, and so it stays with them. Folks, that is a wrong way to go through life. This adds to bitterness, resentment, a root of bitterness, as Hebrews chapter 12 talks about. And so, if you're blaming someone for how you feel, you will want something from them that they can never give you, and therefore you remain stuck. Second thing, in bringing truth to the situation, is that you and I have to balance what they did to us with the personal and the impersonal. And what I mean by that is I'm referring to the pain they inflicted on you. You have to interpret that all in a balance of personal and impersonal and the qualities thereof. What I mean by that is, we tend, when people cause us pain, to take things too personally. Okay? There's no doubt there's a personal element involved. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying to eliminate the personal, because they did something to you, right? You're the one who has the scars. No doubt about that. It was personal to you, and they did it. But you also have to balance that with the impersonal. Because most people don't even see the category of impersonal. And our job as biblical students is to balance the two when looking at somebody who did something to us. Yes, it was personal, but what's the impersonal part of this? So with that being said, I need to unpack this in the next lesson. There's a lot to this. But initially, this is what I wanted to introduce to you, is to understand that when you look back on your situation, you must look back on it through the impersonal and personal. The impersonal I'll unpack, and what that means is this, that the person, there's a part of that person that did not intentionally try to hurt you. Now, in some cases, yes, they did try to intentionally hurt you, but most often, the perpetrator who did something to you, to hurt you and cause pain, didn't do it intentionally. It could have been anybody in that situation, and it would have happened to them. So yes, it happened personally, but there's an impersonal part that happened that you have to factor in. Because if you don't factor that in, you won't be balanced, and you'll swing the pendulum all the way to it just being personal. That these people intentionally tried to ruin your life and destroy you. That might have happened. I'm not saying that those things occur. But for instance, let's say you're part of a divorce. Your parents divorced, okay? If you make that divorce just simply about you, that they divorced because of you, and that you're to blame for the divorce, then you have definitely swung the pendulum too far on taking it personally. So what do? Yeah, the divorce affected you, no doubt about that. That's the personal aspect. The impersonal aspect is this. Your parents were just simply not getting along. They couldn't get along because they had character problems, they had relational deficiencies, and because of that, they did divorce. But it had nothing really to do with you per se. It wasn't directed to you. We're getting a divorce because of you. They're getting a divorce because they have relational deficiencies. And that's the impersonal, that this wasn't even about you to some degree. So unless you balance the two out with the personal and the impersonal, it's going to cause you problems. So I want to unpack that next time and go even deeper into this so that we truly have a good biblical understanding of how to balance the two out, okay? So join us next time as we do part 3 on how to handle our pain and handle our hurt and how to process that from a biblical perspective. God bless you. We'll see you next time.